Shalom, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of the Magic Shul Bus. My name is Michael Colasanti. I'm a practitioner of high-dose psilocybin, LSD, and DMT. I am a Jew by choice, and I am traveling the United States in a school bus with my two dogs, searching for freedom, love, and transcendence. Please join me as we explore life, consciousness, divine creation, and everything in between. I didn't find LSD. LSD found me. In the days and weeks following my initial LSD experience, that sentiment was radiating throughout my being. Now you have to understand, up to this point in my life, I was, by all accounts, very pragmatic, believed in the quote-unquote real world, very science-based, factual, and unless there was some type of quantifiable, qualifiable evidence to back something, I wouldn't hear anything about it. Now, when you begin to experiment with psychedelics and theogens, whatever you want to call them, very quickly your position on what's real, what's not real, spirituality, divine creation, all of these concepts are tested. And it doesn't matter if you wander into the psychedelic experience as an atheist, as a person who participates in some particular religion or spirituality or faith. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you look like or what your background is or how you were raised. Entering into the psychedelic experience, your beliefs about everything will be challenged. And that's part of the reason why it can be difficult to enter into this realm. Because as Terence McKenna would say, it does not bode well for the ego. Wandering into a psychedelic experience with a very concrete concept of what life is, what death is, and the meaning behind it all, or lack thereof, is a recipe for disaster. And I have watched people break under the immense weight of the psychedelic experience. But in the days and weeks following my initial LSD trip, all of these things, all of these concepts, all of these ideas were being debated inside me. Now, for the next 18 months or so, my then girlfriend and I would take LSD every now and again. And in all honesty, I didn't enjoy tripping with another person. I just didn't. Anytime that I would engage in the psychedelic experience with my partner, there was this nagging feeling during the entire experience that I was being throttled to some degree. That I was being prevented from experiencing the full scope of the experience. And that's no fault of my partner at the time. She was actually a great tripping partner. It wasn't her fault. But I couldn't escape this feeling that I wanted to do this alone. Now, in June of 2017, I received my wish. My partner and I had split, gone our separate ways, and for the first time, I had the ability to trip by myself. Now, over the course of the next few months, during the summer of 2017, I began taking a lot of acid. I spent considerable time inside the LSD experience and became very acquainted with my mind, my body, and my spirit. I spent a lot of time in this place by myself. And for anyone who has taken LSD, they will tell you that it is a deeply self-reflective state. Taking LSD by oneself will result in a handful of outcomes, but it is truly an experience in which you will either come out a better person on the other side of these experiences, wiser, more disciplined, or you will lose your mind in the process. And the reason I say that is because you are tested inside these experiences. You are pushed. You are challenged. And you oftentimes are forced to confront your demons, your nightmares, what you dislike about yourself, what you think others think of you. Every conceivable emotion is touched on. And from roughly June of 2017 till August of 2017, I feel as though I took the LSD experience as far as I possibly could. At the time, I was working a straight job in an office, working Monday through Friday. And then typically, every Saturday night or so, I would dose. Now, it was during this time that I really began to elevate my doses. Each experience, I continued to push myself a little bit further and a little bit further. Unbeknownst to me, this time was a training period. I was building a cosmic resume, if you will. I was in preparation for what would eventually come in the form of high-dose mushroom experiences. Now, when I say high-dose psilocybin, I typically am referencing anything above 7 grams. Our brother Terrence McKenna would refer to the heroic dose, and that was 5 dried grams in silent darkness. Now, toward the end of the summer of 2017, due to the fact that I was elevating my doses and the frequency in which I was taking LSD, it started to become an issue sourcing it. I began to have difficulty finding it consistently. There are a lot of fascinating details about LSD. It is an anomaly of sorts. But one of the things about it is incredibly difficult to synthesize and make. In fact, very few people are qualified to synthesize LSD. It is very difficult to do. Now, the person that was very close to me that initially supplied me with the LSD and was, up to this point, supplying me with the LSD, had instructed me that he was no longer going to be able to continue supplying me with it. And he had some personal reasons. Now, when I asked him what the reasons were, he had told me that it simply didn't feel right in his body anymore. Now, at the time, I didn't really understood what that meant because I was still completely in love with LSD. I didn't see any faults in it. I still felt like one of the luckiest people in the world, having been chosen by some cosmic divinity to be able to have these experiences. And I didn't really understand what this person meant when they said that it didn't feel right in their body. But regardless, the reality was I was no longer going to be able to source acid anymore. And I still, in my mind, was only just beginning my journey. I was nowhere even close to finished, and I was not ready to stop yet. So this became an obvious issue for me. Now, the person who had been supplying me the LSD up to this point had instructed me that they were going to begin cultivating psilocybin mushrooms. Now, I talked about this a little bit in the first episode. I had taken mushrooms a couple times in high school, but the honesty is, I just wasn't into it. I didn't care for it. To me, my opinion was that mushrooms brought a ton of anxiety and just kind of weird ebbs and flows to emotion and feeling. And at the same time, I never experienced any of the visual wonder that I had on LSD. I will say one of the things I really like about acid is that even at relatively low doses, you can have fairly decent open and closed eye visuals. Because of the synthesized nature or whatever it is, it's a disproportion between the perceivable stimuli of the experience in conjunction with the perceived disruption to one's senses. Because the reality is that to get visuals with mushrooms and to really to really experience psilocybin, you have to go in deep. And it's part of the reason why LSD is very good for beginners and getting people into psychedelics. It can be very gentle without overwhelming people. But so the person who had been supplying me the LSD had told me he was going to switch over and start growing mushrooms, and he wasn't going to be able to supply me with acid anymore. This was a big deal to me. This came as a huge blow because I had no interest in switching over to mushrooms. I just didn't. But the summer of 2017 was essentially a training seminar for me. Training for high-dose mushrooms, which is where all of my deepest visions and experiences were allowed to flourish. In the 2 years between my first LSD experience and my first high-dose mushroom experience, I had a lot of fun. I mean, it was disciplined, and I was regimented about how I did it. But my 2 years or so of LSD experiences, there just really weren't any spiritual proclivities behind it. I mean, the experience itself definitely opened my mind up to the possibility, or now the fact, that magic is real, and that there is life outside of this body, outside of this mind, that consciousness generates the brain, not the other way around. But still, I didn't take LSD to commune with a higher power. That's not why I did it. I was doing it because it was a lot of fun. And it felt great. And there was very little perceivable downside to it. It was very affordable. And it was a nice change of pace. But clearly for me, there was something in the back of my mind, at the bottom of my heart, that was yearning for more than just to have fun. There was some telos as to why I was doing what I was doing. And I couldn't articulate it at the time, and I quite honestly probably didn't even understand any of this. But I was searching. I was searching for something. Finally, in August of 2017, I ran out of acid, couldn't get any more, and made the decision to pick up a batch of mushrooms and give it a try. I got in my truck, I made the drive, and I picked up an ounce. Now, these mushrooms, I was sort of cautioned in advance, were not beginner mushrooms. These were a high-potency batch of penis envies. Now, any of you who have ever dabbled with penis envies will know firsthand they are not to be taken lightly. Hop on Google and look up penis envies and their strength and their potency, and you will very quickly find out from most people that they are not to be screwed around with. If you're inexperienced and you're going to take them, cut your dose in half and buckle up, because you are in for a serious ride. Of course, at the time, I didn't know any of this, but as I said, I was kind of instructed in advance that just watch what you're doing. These are strong. They're hot. Now, the person I was picking them up from, I kind of asked him for some advice on dosage. Now, he obviously knew that I had been experimenting with LSD for the last couple of years, and he was aware that I could handle myself. And he knew that I wanted to go deep. This person actually instructed me that I should just take the whole ounce. I knew somewhere inside that probably wasn't a good idea. I had heard, and I had read, I had done my own research, reading other people's trip reports, that 5 to 7 grams was mind-bending. That is kind of the upper echelon of what people take. Most people, even experienced trippers, typically don't go above 7 grams. That's kind of the way it goes, especially with high-strength penis envies. Most people don't go above that. You got your few psychonauts out there who do explore into the deep water, but most people don't fuck around above 7 grams. So with the experience that I had up to this point, I decided to myself that 7 grams sounded like a good place to start. So on a beautiful August evening, I decided to enter into my first high-dose psilocybin experience. Now, my method for consumption of mushrooms is really simple, really easy to ingest, and really easy to digest. The best way to do it is to make it into a tea. Hands down, it is the best way, and for a couple of reasons. Personally, I can't stand the taste or the smell of mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. I don't like it. I find it very nauseating. It makes me gag. I don't care for the taste. So the best thing you can do is make it into a tea. And it doesn't matter how high potency and high dose the tea is. If you doctor it up right and you prepare it properly, if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't even know that it's a psychedelic brew. You'd have no idea. So some basic instructions on how to brew up world-class tea. Now, something I want to say up front, and this really needs to be said. I think most people probably do this, but I've encountered my fair share of people who this never occurred to them. Whenever you enter into the psychedelic experience, or you plan to enter into this state, always weigh your dose. Always, always, always weigh your dose. I've encountered too many people who just reach into the bag and eat. It makes me just feel really weird thinking about that, because I am obsessed with quantifying these experiences, documenting them, breaking them down, analyzing them. After 7+ years of doing this at very high levels, I think I can count on one hand how many times I've just simply reached into the bag and eyeballed it. And this was after years of having a lot of experience doing it. But always weigh your dose. But weigh your dose, put the material into a coffee grinder, powderize the mushroom material, boil some water on the stovetop, put your mushroom material in the boiling water. Set a timer for 10 minutes on boil, then 10 minutes on low. Remember to stir the material the whole time so it doesn't scorch or foam up over the pot. Once the material is cooled a good bit, use a French press and strain the mushroom material out. Once the material's been strained, pour into a cup, mug, drop in your favorite tea, honey, squeeze a lemon in there, and you are set to rock and roll. Now, what I've noticed about making tea out of the mushroom as opposed to eating it whole out of the bag, the experience is expedited and it is considerably more powerful. It's condensed is what it is. It's going to be shorter, but it's going to kick faster and harder. And I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but in reality, that's what I'm looking for. The reality is when you make a tea out of it, you're looking at, I'm in and out in 2.5 hours. I'm still definitely feeling some residual effects after that 2.5 hours, but I've peaked, come back, and I can have a conversation, and I'm lucid, and I'm aware of what's going on after 2.5 hours. None of this 4 to 6 hour stuff. And it makes sense why it's expedited. You're powderizing the mushroom material, increasing your surface area, and you are mixing it in with a hot liquid, increasing its activation. Throw some lemon in there, and when I make good mushroom tea, I can feel it within 18 to 22 minutes. I can feel it the minute it begins to kick in. And none of this 40, 45 minute stuff. You make tea out of it, 15 to 25 minutes, you're in there. But on this particular evening in August, I mixed up some tea. And, it's funny. After 2 years of heavy LSD use, I had no idea what to expect with psilocybin. I will say that the LSD definitely prepared me for the mushroom experience. That all that time spent was necessary. It was my psychedelic training wheels, so to speak. But the high-dose psilocybin experience was and is so much more powerful than LSD can ever hope to be. And the reason I say this is because of how in love with acid I was and how reticent I was to stop using it. Had my source not essentially cut me off and switched over to mushrooms, I would have kept taking acid if it were my choice. But I dosed, and I made a real rookie mistake, though. I went and laid on the couch and curled up into a ball and just kind of prayed away the onset. One of the worst things you can do during the onset is simply go curl up into a ball and just wait for the onset to pass. That's not what you want to do. What is absolutely necessary to have any hope of surviving the experience, and when I say survive it, I don't mean actually dying, but I mean not completely falling apart and getting destroyed by it. You have to move during the onset. You have to breathe. You have to chant. You have to sing. You have to stretch. You have to dance. You have to move around. I understand that the intuitive sort of, initially anyway, the intuitive urge is to just go curl up and just get into the fetal position and just like, you're protecting yourself, right? Even though this isn't a physical attack, you're still, it's instinctual to get into the fetal position and just curl up. And that will bring about trouble for you really quickly. You need to move your body. You have to introduce oxygen into the bloodstream. You got to stretch the muscles. You have to express yourself. You have to imagine that the mushroom material that you just consumed, while it's sitting in your stomach, it's as it's being broken down by your stomach acid and absorbed into your bloodstream. You have to imagine the energy radiating out from your stomach. You have to imagine that that the mushroom material is now creating a symbiosis with your being. That after consumption of the mushroom material, the mushroom is essentially coming to life, expressing itself through you. There is a chemical reaction going on here. But I went and I laid on the couch and I curled up in a ball. And it is one of the hardest come-ups I've ever had in my life. Now, I had experienced what's kind of referred to as ego death, which is kind of a broad description of the phenomenon, what a person experiences inside the psychedelic experience. But this quarter-ounce trip was the first time that I really felt as though I had died, that I had crossed over to the other side, so to speak, that I had entered into a spirit world of some sort. There was a lot of communication with people who had passed away during this experience, and there was a definite awareness of something greater. Now, this experience was done in my living room in silent darkness. There is something very important about mushrooms in particular, and DMT as well, but utilizing them in the darkest possible setting. Tripping during the day is great and fine and fantastic, and it is beautiful to see cosmic architecture lit up by the sun. It's a beautiful thing, and it's definitely worth doing. But the truest, most definitive version of the psychedelic experience is done at night. To really bring out the open eye visuals, it's the same concept as the deprivation tank. It's the sensory deprivation tank, right? The float tank. The idea is that you want to remove the body from the equation. You want consciousness to persist with the sensation or the perception of the body removed. And for obvious reasons, when you do this during the day, or if there's any sort of light, you can see your body, you can feel it. It just doesn't quite, you just can't go as deep. Now, the visions that I had during this experience were beautiful, beautiful fractal imagery, kaleidoscopic in nature. Feelings of eternality were present. I was pleasantly surprised by how wonderful the high-dose psilocybin experience went for me. And almost overnight, I disavowed LSD. Now, it still was almost a year after this point that I would kind of cease to take LSD anymore, and we'll get into that later. But this first quarter-ounce trip was a game changer for me. And it went so well for me that I was ready to get really serious about this and start to enter into somewhat dangerous territory. Some really deep, dark water I began to wade into after this experience. Now, again, everything about this first high-dose mushroom trip was great. It was fantastic. I mean, I was completely electrified by it. My curiosity was just, it was going crazy. And I wanted to keep peeling back and peeling back and peeling back at this phenomenon. And it was this moment of like, I'm like looking around and I'm like, does anybody else know about this? Now, the truth is, I did have some difficulty initially after this first quarter ounce trip. I did have some difficulty articulating the experience initially. And I began to kind of scour the internet for some advice, some interpretations, someone who could kind of help me flesh a lot of this out. And in my searching, I found a gentleman by the name of Terence McKenna. Now, I've mentioned McKenna a couple times here already. And if it's not already obvious, McKenna is my brother. I love Terence. And in the days and weeks and months following this initial high-dose mushroom experience, I sought out help. And I found Terence. Terence, if you haven't listened, if you've listened to Terence, you know. If you know, you know. If you haven't listened to Terence McKenna, I mean, Terence, you don't even have to take psychedelics, to be perfectly honest. You don't have to take psychedelics. Listening to McKenna it's like being hypnotized. He is the most wonderful orator and speaker. His knowledge, his wisdom is profound. And what strikes me the most about Brother McKenna is the degree of sincerity and joyful and youthful curiosity in which he spoke about the psychedelic experience. And primarily with psilocybin and DMT. And on this channel here, those are the two compounds that I really am going to focus on. I include LSD, in my resume, so to speak. And I still think it's a fascinating substance and compound, and it gave me my start in this life, in this lifestyle. But the reality is I simply just don't hold it in the same regard as psilocybin or DMT. And as the show progresses and we episode by episode, we're further going to flesh all this out. And I'm going to share some really wild stories that have taken place, some crazy experiences, trips that are so deep, so mind-shattering, that it's brought me to where I'm at today, in the middle of the desert in a school bus, hosting a podcast here, beaming this out to people all over the planet. I ask that you forgive me in advance, because if you can't tell already, admittedly, I get a little scatterbrained when talking about all this stuff, because at this point, the scope is so vast. My experience has been going on for years and years now. I have so many stories. I get sidetracked so very easily with talking about this stuff. So I apologize in advance, because I know sometimes this can be hard to follow. The deeper we go down this rabbit hole, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for joining me and listening, and hopefully taking something away from this. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.